Good afternoon. I hope everyone is having a wonderful Big Tent conference. We do this because we care a lot about information. We care exactly for the same reasons you do, because of the impact that it can have. What I think about is what these devices represent. When I look at this, I say to myself, oh my God, this device is really a small supercomputer. And this is a slightly larger supercomputer, all connected over this fast network to these powerful servers. But then I realize that this is just really the beginning of something much, much bigger. And the numbers tell the story. There are now 1.3 million activations of Android devices per day. And that number has doubled in the last 6 months. A little bit of math will tell you that we're on our way to more than 1 billion or so of these kinds of devices pretty soon. There are more than 500 million now. And of course, everyone's waiting the announcement of the major competitor on Friday. And everyone's very excited about that, which is wonderful. Another great competitor, a smaller percentage than we have at this point. The fact of the matter is that both these platforms are completely changing everything we do, the way we live, and the way we operate. In so many ways, and it would never have occurred to me in all my years of doing this sort of thing that you'd have startups that would all be about what people want, what information they want, how to meet other people, where they should go, what they should do, how they should entertain themselves. But not only are those startups being formed, especially here in New York, but they're going to be successful because of the sheer logic of numbers. But even more interesting is to imagine what's going to be possible with these devices over the next few years. Imagine these not just as pieces of hardware, but as ecosystems. Ecosystems that are highly personal, that you've opted into, so you've let us know these things, where we can help give you advice. They serve as your assistant. They suggest things. This is all in the works. So now, imagine a few steps farther. What does the future look like then? This is not the end, this is the beginning. And this is where it gets particularly interesting. All of us have been trapped in this model, the traditional PC model of everything right there. The most interesting thing about computers is that they almost disappear because they become so commonplace. I'll give you a scenario. When you wake up in the morning, right, the room is alive. And the room knows roughly how to wake you at the optimal point in your REM cycle. It knows what you need in the morning, and it alerts you through complex and powerful screens, the things that you care about, so that you know whether you have a crisis today or whether you can relax and stay in bed for a while. Pretty straightforward. What's interesting about this new world is that these devices, again, all opt in, all in ways that you've set up, help you every day along the way. Not only do they measure your heart rate and how you're doing, but they also make your life so much more efficient. How much time do you spend wasting making travel reservations, trying to figure out where the bus is, how do I get from here to there, and so forth? They anticipate what you need, where you're going, because of the things that you have told it, or the things that it thinks you want. And all of a sudden, you begin to realize that it's not just an assistant, it's really a very smart assistant. Now, as these devices get stronger and as they become more capable, they can do other things. Now, there's no better example of this than in medicine. The app that I want, I call Where's My Mom, right? Many people have elderly parents. I want computers to help monitor how my mom is doing. How was her day? Is she good? Is she bad? Right? In case there's some alert or something that she needs. The good news is she's in good health, but you never know, right? Why can't we do that? Well, in fact, people are building those devices right now. But now let's go one step further. Eventually, over the next decade, you'll be able to actually have things that you ingest that will transmit through Wi-Fi, that will they'll say what's going on inside of you. You can decide if you want to do this or not. But trust me, your health will be better. You guys don't look like you're very happy about this. But it's really, people are developing this stuff now. What about transdermal measurement? These are devices, you hold your phone, and again, without pricking your skin, it can measure your blood pressure, your various other vital signs, and so forth. We're going to build the systems so that the doctor calls you and says, you better get yourself to the hospital right now, rather than you calling the doctor. And that's the ultimate inversion of this model. That these devices, that the microminiaturization, the technology that we've taken, that's been so heavy and hard to use for most of us, becomes embedded inside of us. There's a new generation of technology, social robots, that can actually recognize gestures, that can actually interact, all of which will be put to the service of us. So when you think about this from an art perspective and a culture perspective, it says that these devices, which we're so incredibly excited about, will be seen as so extraordinarily primitive, and that the ability to build systems that interact, that help us, that monitor us, again, because we want them to, will make a huge, huge difference to everybody's lives. And the most exciting thing about this is that in the spread of this, it happens not just for us, the wealthy, developed world, but the same story at a slower scale works in the developing world. So we sit there and we go, well, we're really excited. We can use Google here, we can watch YouTube and so forth. In a country with no schools, no textbooks, and the only thing they have are these devices are life-changing. And over the next 3 to 5 years, the next 5 billion will get low-end smartphones of one kind or another that will finally enable them to join our conversation and to get the benefits of the information, the culture, the art, and all the things that you all have worked so hard. It's extraordinary to imagine all of the world now being able to participate at the state of the art, at the level of technology that we're talking about today. This is, I think, why we're so excited about our partnerships with you all and why we're putting so much money in this kind of stuff. I thought what I should do is pause and perhaps ask people's comments or questions as we begin the rest of the afternoon. So who would like to start with questions or comments on this or on anything else? Yes. In the back, go ahead. Yes, sir.
What, in the future, the individual's responsibility for themselves will be or could be, and how's that changed in our relationship to larger corporations that would have to run these systems?
It's a very good question. The technology can be programmed to be more of a nanny state or more of a libertarian model for purposes of discussion, right? If you want to imagine the two most extremes. I believe societies will ultimately choose somewhere along that arc. And I think societies will choose different points based on culture, legal precedent, the way they're run. Autocracies, for example, will be much less interested in your personal freedom than a democracy, right, for obvious reasons. And there's lots of evidence of that. That's, I think, the first observation. It will vary. All of these systems, in my view, will ultimately be designed around the individual has to opt in. It's simply too scary to imagine these things being imposed on people. I argue, and I feel very strongly, that in the hawks versus doves argument, the hawks tend to win, and there tends to be a stripping of privacy. There tends to be a loss of individual responsibility, if you will, the ability to make your own choice. But I do think that societies will make those decisions in different levels, and the technology will serve that. You asked the second part of your question was, what are the responsibilities of global companies? We spent a lot of time at Google thinking about this. And the conclusion we've come to is we have a set of principles that we believe in to make the world a better place. And we will push them as hard as we can up to the point where we're violating the laws of the other country. So we will take a position when there's an ambiguity for free expression, openness, freedom of choice. We trust you. When it comes to literally violating the law of the other country, then we're forced to back away, sometimes, in our view, for the wrong reasons. And I think that's, most global companies will come to that. Our attitude is seen in many countries as American hegemony. It's important to understand that my message, which plays well in the US, does not necessarily play well in other countries. More questions? Yes, yes, ma'am.
What I brought up before about market saturation, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the availability, making the availability of any kind of a creative work, whether it's a newspaper, a work of art, but making it available so broadly that it therefore saturates a market, which tends to push pricing down, which tends to then, I believe, perhaps support industries as a whole, but not the smaller company, not the smaller individual. And is that where we're going, where it becomes almost like the old motion picture studio model for all creative works, and that's the only way to make money is if the companies own all of this because of this market saturation?
I agree with the first half of your question and not the conclusion. So the rough analysis of what's going on is that we went from an era of scarcity to an era of abundance, that the distribution models of the past were largely limited by physical constraints, the difficulty of copying, et cetera, et cetera. So you had high cost of distribution, high cost of manufacturing. In the digital world, you have essentially no cost of distribution and no cost of manufacturing. So you've gone from the era of scarcity to an era of abundance. In an era of abundance, there are many, many strategies to make money. Unfortunately, the people who made the money in the era of scarcity often don't make the transition to the next, and they struggle for all sorts of reasons. In the newspapers, which is an easy one to understand, there are a number of newspapers that were formed that are new, that are doing very well, that adopted an advertising model as opposed to a subscription model. Let me name Politico and the Huffington Post, as to Huffington Post run out of here. And so those are some examples of new ventures, new business models, where they ditched the old model, right? It's fine to keep the old model, but the point is it's a hybrid model. So it does not then follow that all the content is owned by big companies. I think what it means is that at each point in the value chain of distribution, you have to come up with a strategy to build an audience that will get you enough market that you can monetize it. The old model of, hey, I'm going to restrict access to my content works if you have something which you can get a subscription revenue for, but doesn't generally work in a world where everything's so easily copyable. And that's, I think, where we are. A lot of people are struggling with this. But we do have a lot of very good examples now. If you look at YouTube, classic example, the major studios took years to get to the point where they were comfortable putting their content on YouTube. And now we've pretty much got partners with every single one of them, and pretty much every one of those deals is making money. So we, together with them, figured out a way to monetize that content in a new way. It just took a while.
But doesn't that money then go to the companies as opposed to the individual creators?
The question is, does it go to the companies rather than individual creators? The logic would be the inverse, because the networks should disintermediate the middlemen, and that the aggregate revenue should increase to the content provider at the end state, right? So that you may be seeing a transition effect, or you may be seeing some aspect of the market that doesn't make sense. But typically, the internet disintermediates the middle people, and it forces the middlemen to become much more highly verticalized and specialized, because sheer distribution is no longer an asset. Yes, sir, go ahead.
YouTube film, which is crossing across the world virally at the moment. Any thoughts on this and what it means for the future?
This is not the first time we've had controversial videos on YouTube. Our team has reviewed the this video very, very carefully. It's well within the guidelines that we established in 2008 for what would be permissible in YouTube, and you can read them on the site, so there's no secrets here. So it'll stay up. We have blocked it in a couple of countries where the law does not allow it to be shown, and we have blocked it in 2 other countries where we thought it was a matter of public safety. We don't want to be associated with this violence, of course. My personal view is that you have internal strife. The vast majority of the people who seem to be engaged in this bad behavior have not seen the video. They heard it through oral reports and so forth. So to argue against keeping the video up is to argue against a core freedom of expression argument. And I think all of us believe in religious tolerance, and that includes religious criticism. And you'll see that in our policies. So we've made the decision to keep it up. We obviously do not endorse any of the actions or violence that have consequences. And frankly, I think this is going to happen again in other forms, as a consequence of the connected world. The alternative is to shut off the internet, which we're not going to do.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a follow-up question about what the gentleman was saying. You said at some point the doctor will call you. You don't need to call the doctor. Let's assume we live in a country where it's illegal to be gay. You have AIDS. Do you want your doctor to call you?
Well, this is why I said earlier, it's incredibly important that these systems be user choice. So if you're aware that you're potentially eligible for some health disease which is illegal in your crazy and stupid country, right? If you find yourself stuck in the world's worst country, which would do that, obviously it's a terrible situation, you would be, you would appropriately decide not to expose yourself to this possible risk. There is an issue here that these systems tend naturally to be connected and naturally have tracking capabilities just because of the way they're built. And so that's why opt-in, the ability to turn them on and off, and user buy-in are very important. A couple more. Yes, the one there. Yes, over here and here. Go ahead. Doesn't matter. Yes, sir.
Yeah, we've had experience in the age of the internet of material not being available anymore as storage systems change. And there are constant upgrades, faster and faster and faster, especially with mobile. So that eventually people have to recognize a day may come when, oh, my photographs, my music, my text, my novel, they've disappeared. Where are they? I think if Ray Bradbury were writing 451 in this day and age, it wouldn't be about burning books. It would be about pushing a button on a computer somewhere, and they would all just digitally disappear. As our technology progresses, how do we know that we're going to be able to retain that from the past as a new storage system comes into being?
There are whole teams looking at this question. This is known as the digital archival question. I'm not as worried about this because the systems that Google and others are building tend to preserve everything in a format that is presentable. Eventually, I think your argument is correct. But for example, the ubiquity of JPEGs and photographs, there will always, in my view, 100 years from now, be a converter from that JPEG format to whatever exists. There's simply too much. There's too many. So I don't worry about this issue for things which are highly common. I do think that if you have a very specialized format, it really is danger of losing that. And so if you're using the very standardized data representation formats, you'll probably be fine. And for the specialized stuff, there are people trying to figure out how to archivally keep this, things like the Smithsonian and things like that. But your safety in terms of preservation is to use the most common formats. YouTube's not going to go away, right, as an example, uses common formats. Yes, there was a question over here. Yes, yes, sir.
I just wanted to ask you about search and curation, I guess. You talked about 5 billion more people entering this conversation. It seems like two things sort of happen. One, we sort of all go into an echo chamber and we find the things we find over and over again versus being given things. As the conversation increases, how are we going to find the things that are really important to us?
There's been a lot of people who've worried that the nature of the selection bias and the systems that are being built will ultimately produce narrow echo chambers where we only hear ourselves and our friends and so forth and so forth. This has been measured, and so far it's completely not true. So far, we've managed to escape this sort of outcome of lack of criticality, if you will. And I personally believe that as more voices come in, it's good from a standpoint of more choices and so forth. We would argue that this is a ranking problem. How do you, with all these new voices, how do you rank those voices compared to the others? Well, we're in the business of ranking. It's not perfect, but we do the best we can. I think we have time for a couple more. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. I want to follow up on your disintermediation point and ask if you might envision the technologies that Google facilitates the development of as an ultimate disruptor, possibly eventually disintermediating the need for the real estate that cinemas offer for alternate content, and that possibly opening up the abilities for a greater amount of this artistic alternative content to find its way there. And 3 points to it just quickly.
Well, no,
if the in-cinema is big, democratized in its offering, and community, cannot those 3 things and more be offered online?
But see, I have a very strong opinion on movie theaters. I think that they're incredibly important because they're the only place where people turn off their mobile devices.
Now.
No, think about it. Is there any other place in the world, right? You keep it on when you're asleep, but not when you're in the movie theater. This is landmark status. So look, I think going to the movies is a social experience, the sense of going to the opening and so forth. That's not going to go away. Okay. And so I think the movie folks all believe that you're seeing a compression of windows. Mm-hmm. But I think the model will preserve at least the notion of opening night. People want to feel special. It goes back to the question earlier about scarcity. Very clever marketeers understand that if they make slightly fewer of a product than there is demand, it creates excessive lines. That's what happens in the clubs around here, right? You know, the most popular club is defined as the one with the longest line, not the greatest capacity. Yeah, we have one final question. Right over here. Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. How do you go about educating entire populaces about the ins and outs of opting in, when they should do it, how they should do it, when they shouldn't do it?
Well, first place, you start with an awful lot of information that's online, and you try to make it readable in people's language and they can understand it. Most people are confused by what's happening because they're not computer scientists, they don't really understand how this stuff can be used. So we've tried very hard to do that. I think the reality is that education in general is going to change a big deal around the world because you no longer need to memorize all this stuff. Now you need to have a significant education in being an online citizen, right? As a young person, what does it mean to be a tweeter? What does it mean to be texting? So for example, all these high school students are probably going to be rather surprised to discover that all those pictures are still around when they're 45. You know, and nobody told them that, or if their parents told them that, they discounted it, but if their teachers tell them, maybe they will listen. So I think there's a whole series of steps that society will go through. What I will tell you is that the shift from the analog world to the digital world that we're going through is we're not going back, right? So we need to get organized around how we're going to run society respectfully, with appropriate levels of privacy, respecting the rights of public safety and so forth, and sort that out. And I think countries will make those decisions differently. And this will be a constant discussion in the media and so forth. And I think that's how the education really occurs. So with that, Peter, thank you very much. Thank you all. Okay, and we'll continue. Thank you.